Hello and welcome to Mager Media. I am Biniam Ambachew and I'm your host for Mager English program. Today, I'm honored to have Robel Alemu. Robel is a communication director of the Amhara Association of America. Robel, along with the entire team of AAA, have been working tirelessly, advocating and leading the Amhara movement internationally. Robel, welcome to Mager Media. It's good to be with you.
Thank you for having me, Biniam. It's a pleasure to be here on Mager with you today to discuss all of these important issues. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's good to be with you. Please stay with us and join the discussion, and we will return after a short break. Welcome back to all of you. Today, we will analyze and highlight the joint cooperative official complaint that was submitted against the Ethiopian government to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. This complaint was submitted on February 6, 2023, and it was a joint and cooperative endeavor of the Amhara Association of America and the Center for Human Rights at Pretoria University in South Africa. We will also discuss the press release that was initiated by AAA on February 28, 2023. The Amhara Association of America released a press statement declining to sign the joint statement by the civic organization, calling the UN Human Rights Council members to not terminate the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, also known as ICHREE. We will also briefly discuss another press release that was released on March 4th, 2023, which was a call for immediate Amhara administration of Addis Ababa. So, Robel, to begin with the official complaint that was submitted on February 14, 2023, there was a joint press statement made by the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, South Africa, and the Amhara Association of America. Following on the February 6, 2023, submitted a complaint to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights against the Ethiopian government. This complaint argues on behalf of Amharas that are being persecuted in Oromia region. Can you explain how this complaint submission was initiated and provide us with a brief overview of the cascading events that led up to the complaint being submitted?
Thank you, Biniam. I'm happy to elaborate on that. As you've correctly described, this complaint was filed by AAA in collaboration with the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And really, the reason why this was put into place is because, as you know, AAA for some time has been documenting human rights violations against the Amhara people. This is for the plain reason that the targeting of Amhara people has intensified in recent years, especially since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his party came to power in Ethiopia. And this targeting has been concentrated especially in the Oromia region, as well as other places such as the Benishangul Gumuz region, and then during the war in Amhara region. And so our people have faced widespread human rights violations. AAA has documented these, for example, in its 2021 annual report. There's another annual report coming up covering atrocities in 2022. But the idea is that going beyond documenting these human rights violations, that for this Amharic genocide to stop, there needs to be accountability, there needs to be justice. And as part of accountability and justice, there needed to be a mechanism to promote this using all available tools at our disposal. And so this effort to pursue justice through the African Commission mechanism is the first attempt, major attempt by any organization to actually begin to ask for justice and accountability for Amhara genocide. So I think this is a momentous and historic event. And so this was done in collaboration with the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. And just to give some background, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, or ACHPR, is a judicial body that was formed in 1987, which promotes human and people's rights and freedoms in accordance with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, also known as the Banjul Charter. And that's Banjul Charter. So the Banjul Charter was adopted in 1981 and promotes these basic human rights and freedoms in the context of the African continent. So that's plain and simple what this mechanism is for. And this is the highest human rights tool in the African continent. So this is an international mechanism that we can use to gain accountability. And specifically, this is accountability against the government of Ethiopia for complicity in these human rights violations against the Amhara people in Oromia region, especially in the western part of Oromia region, including the Eastern Wollega, West Wollega, Horo Guduru, Qelem Wollega, and West Shewa Zones. And so, as we know, the concentration of the human rights violations has been very high in this area of the Oromia region. And unfortunately, Amharas have been subject to a number of crimes, including extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, property destruction, communication blackouts, violent dispersal of peaceful protests. And we've seen just a massive displacement of Amhara people and an ethnic cleansing that has gone on for Amharas to be completely removed from the Oromia region. And the perpetrators, although in much of these cases it's the Oromo Liberation Army, there's also been a direct backing of this Oromo Liberation Army militants by the Oromia regional government and federal government authorities. And so these are the primary perpetrators, as well as the Oromia Special Forces. And the Oromia Special Forces are actually state forces. So these are government forces that have been complicit in these human rights violations, including massacres of Amhara people. And so, in essence, we're trying to get accountability for this Amhara genocide that's being perpetrated by these groups with backing from the Oromia regional government. And so, when we talk about the Oromia regional government, this is the leadership of the likes of Shimadlis Abdisa, this is the likes of Abiy Ahmed, and the entire security apparatus. And throughout our reports on these isolated incidents, we've talked about we've talked about individual cases of government officials, even at local woreda levels, zonal levels, being complicit in these incidents, sometimes even leading the perpetrators to commit these atrocious acts. One can remember, for example, the Tole massacre that occurred earlier in 2022 in June. And this was one of the largest massacres against Amhara people in that area in the West Wollega zone. And then more recently, for example, we had the massacre in Ano town in Gobusea Woreda in East Wollega. We also issued a report on this on February 2nd. And the nature of these crimes has gotten worse and worse. So, for example, in this Ano massacre, we had these forces actually targeting Amhara IDPs. So these were Amharas displaced already from these targeted ethnic violence and then being targeted again. So this is an increasing disturbing trend. And then more recently, we also had the attack on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church worshippers in various parts of the region. And so the idea is that these victims, these children, pregnant women, disabled people, elderly, bedridden people are being targeted in these atrocious crimes, and there needs to be accountability. And so this is the first step to pushing for this accountability. And as this complaint is accepted, there's going to be a motion for the issued against the Ethiopian government to actually respond to these allegations. And up until this time, we've seen a trend of the Ethiopian government actually obstructing investigations in times of these incidents, these massacres, actually turning off telecommunication services. And so there was access that was being hindered to this area, especially in Western Oromia, where these people were inaccessible. And so this is a motion to try and change that trend, and to start to highlight the plight of Amharas, and to actually gain justice so that there's no more of this hiding of the truth, the hiding of the Amhara genocide, and the obstruction of justice.
That's wonderfully said, Robel. Thank you for that. This is a significant milestone for conducted by AAA, to bring, like you mentioned, accountability to the unending suffering as well as ethnic cleansing that we see of Amharas in different parts of Oromia region to the international stage. And I want to extend my congratulations to the AAA team for initiating and completing this endeavor on behalf of Amharas. To go more in detail of the complaint, if I can quote one of the statements that was mentioned in the complaint. So it says here, these atrocities against ethnic Amhara civilians are the result and continuation of decades of institutionalized discrimination and systematic persecution. Their plight is linked to the very narrative of Ethiopia's current federalism, which is based on ethnic arrangements and the unwavering desire of ultra-national forces, both within and outside of government structures, to downgrade and demonize Amhara language speakers. Can you explain how this statement kind of conceptualizes and links the ongoing Amhara genocide that we see and the persecution that we see to the current Ethiopia ethnic federalism? And briefly discuss how this narrative kind of demonizes Amhara civilians across Ethiopia.
Certainly, Biniam, that's a very good question. And really, this is the system that has been enabling the genocide to happen for the last few decades. And this was the system that was enacted when the Tigray People's Liberation Front came to power in the early 90s. We had this ethnic federation imposed on the Ethiopian people, and specifically the formation of ethnic regions that minoritized Amharas. So Amharas were singled out and actually framed as not being indigenous to ethnic regional states. And the Oromia region actually was one of the most hostile regions for Amhara. So we mentioned the targeted attacks against Amharas that intensified in the last few years, but the targeting didn't start in the last few years. It started from at least the 90s, if not before, when these early extremists, including the Oromo Liberation Front, were targeting Amharas in various parts of the Oromia region. And so this targeting intensified when the prime minister came to power and invited the OLF from its exile in Eritrea to return to Ethiopia. And then there was this split off of this Oromo Liberation Army. And then more recently, we had direct collaboration between the Oromo Liberation Army and Oromia Special Forces. And so for the longest time, the OLA was perceived as a rebel group, but more recently we saw active collaboration between the so-called rebels and state forces. And so this targeting of Amharas, it's made even more complicated by the fact that in a lot of these violations, we have complicity or actually involvement of local collaborators, including Qero, the ultra-nationalist Oromo youth. So the Qero, local militias, local Oromo farmers, these are organized by the regional officials and by the OLA, and together they're actually going door to door and targeting Amharas to wipe them out from the Oromia region. And I think what's important to also mention here is that under the system of this ethnic apartheid system, which is really what it is, we have currently an Oromo ethnic party that is dominating the politics in the country, and that it's dominating all aspects of the governance, including the military apparatus, the security, the economy. And the outcome of this is that there's this perception that to dominate and continue to dominate, that there needs to be the strengthening of the Oromia region at the expense of other regions. So this is kind of a framework where the Oromia region, now there's capital associated with land. And so the Oromia region wants to actually expand and take territories outside of the Oromia region. So it's not just the Amharas and the non-Oromos inside the Oromia region that are at risk. It's actually communities on all borders of the Oromia region, including the Amhara region, where there's been documented a large number of attacks against Amhara communities, especially in the North Shewa and the Gujam areas of the Amhara region, as well as the South Wollo, North Wollo areas. And it's not just the Amhara region that's at risk. Recently, we've seen reports of attacks or even land annexations within the Somali region, within the Benishangul Gumuz region, there was reports of such activity or intent of the southern region, and the list goes on, the Gambela region. And so we have this expansionist mentality within the ruling Oromo elites that actually threatens the existence of not just the Amharas, but other non-Oromos. And it's interesting that you brought up this conceptualization, because even as early as either today or I think it was yesterday, there was even a government official, an Oromo Prosperity government official, that on their social media communications actually addressed this and tried to deny the reports of this expansion of the Oromia region, and tried to actually deflect and then accuse the Ethiopian state of doing this in the past historically. And this is part of the narrative that actually pushes Amhara phobia. This Amhara phobia is this instilling this fear of Amhara people, this idea that Amharas having any type of equality or power sharing is going to lead to harm to other groups. And this is something that we don't see in any other part of the world in the 21st century. This is a system that is actually pushing for fragmentation of the country. We know from the Constitution, there's elements such as Article 39, the federal Constitution, that allows ethnic regions to actually secede. And the whole framework, it doesn't consider Ethiopia as as a country. This is actually a framework that considers Ethiopia almost as, or more as a confederation. So you're comparing these ethnic regions within the Ethiopian state as more of like nations within an association. So it's almost like Ethiopia is like an African Union within the African Union. Mm-hmm. So this conceptualization is something that was pushed by the TPLF, the OLF, and their partners. And even to this day, we're seeing it actually victimize Amhara people, but as well as other minority groups that are not at part of the power sharing agreement.
Absolutely. Thank you for that overview, Robel. I strongly believe that the current Ethiopian structure, the federal structure, needs to be rearranged, and we need a new system of governments in Ethiopia for real change to come that will be able to represent everyone that live in Ethiopia equally without ethnically identifying them and telling them to leave a specific area because of their ethnicity. I want to extend to the press release that AAA released on March 4th, 2023. And this is for the Amhara Association of America called for immediate Amhara administration of Addis Ababa. So we have seen a growing suppression of Amhara and non-Oromo communities within the outskirts of Addis Ababa in the newly established Shagir City administration. We've seen homes being destroyed by bulldozers, and many say this is part of the Oromo Prosperity Party's full incorporation of Addis Ababa into the Oromia regional states. In the latest annual Adwa celebration, we've seen the banning of the Ethiopian flag. We've seen residents prevented from wearing shirts that have enshrined Emperor Menelik or Empress Taitu. And specifically in the press statement, it declares that the fate similar to the Amhara genocide in Wollega is making its way to Addis Ababa. So why did the AAA call for the Amhara administration of Addis Ababa as the only viable way to present the Amhara genocide and ensure the rights of non-Amhara minorities in Addis Ababa are also protected?
Excellent question, Biniam. And I'd love to address that. Actually, this call for immediate Amhara administration of Addis Ababa was a call because it came at a time when Amharas and other groups are being targeted in an unprecedented scale. And so the crimes that have been happening in Addis on the outskirts of the city range in so many ways, but they've actually intensified in recent months. We've seen the demographic engineering and ethnic profiling. AAA has reported previously on the arrests of Amhara youth for arbitrary reasons. There's been ethnic cleansing on the outskirts of the city in this newly established Shagir administration. We've seen thousands of families thrown on the streets and actually kicked out of their homes, which were demolished. Sometimes they were demolished on top of them. And we've heard all types of very heartbreaking stories of families being harmed by wild animals and all types of mental anguish as a result of this traumatic experience. And this is being done on an ethnic basis. It's targeting non-Oromo and especially Amhara residents, as well as some other minority groups. And these arbitrary arrests and forced disappearances have taken many different forms. It's also had a religious component with the state's recent attack on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where we had arrests of Orthodox leaders and worshippers. And I think this goes back to this idea of this anti-Ethiopia framing and this association, I think, of the church with the Amhara people and this Amhara phobia. And then there was the Adwa victory celebrations where the security forces actually targeted city residents for celebrating this national holiday. And it's very troubling what we're hearing, because what we're seeing is the precursors to actually a full-blown genocide in Addis Ababa. And this is not far-fetched, because we've seen high-ranking government officials, including the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, including Shimadlis Abdis, including Adanech Ababe, talking about this concept of this Oromo first, or this Oromo dominance and this policy of apartheid in Addis. And, I think the lack of accountability for the genocide in other parts of the country has enabled or has incentivized this new encroachment on Addis, so this intensified encroachment. But this is part of a longer pattern that we saw for the past 5 years. We saw the lack of tolerance for opposition political parties. We saw what happened to the officials of Baldras, what continues to happen. And we've seen how this has continued. And now I think this call is timely because Amhara administration of Addis, if things were done on a demographic basis, so if the redrawing of lines, or if the drawing of lines that happened to chart out these regions was done on a demographic basis, the Amhara majority in Addis and the ancestral, this historic ties that Amhara people have to Addis makes Amhara administration of Addis a logical solution. And so Amhara administration of Addis is critical. And we saw what happened, for example, in places like Wollega and Raya, where when Amharas reclaimed their land and reversed the annexation of their land by other forces, the Amharas were actually spared of a genocide. So we've said this before, but in Wollega, for example, we saw what happened in Maikadra. The Maikadra massacre was the single worst massacre of the war in the north. And if Amharas had not taken ownership of their land like they did, it would have been a continuation of the ethnic cleansing of the genocide of Amharas by the TPLF. And so what we're seeing in the South is now a very similar situation. And this was all by design. This was all by design. We talked about the Constitution, the ethnic federal system. This was a system that was designed to minoritize Amharas, to annex away their land into other regions, and to actually make them vulnerable to targeting, to essentially wipe them out, but also to establish ethnic dominance of the ruling party. Previously, it was the Tigrayan dominance. Now it's Oromo hegemony. And what's happening in Addis now, what we're witnessing in real time, is something that's evolving from ethnic cleansing to a full-blown extermination. And so this is a preventative measure that can save lives. It's not an extremist type of statement to make. This is a logical statement that is in accordance with the demography of the area. And if this is done, we can actually avoid and prevent an encroaching genocide in Addis Ababa.
Absolutely. And it's better to act early than, when things are already on full-scale genocide. And we have seen the signs already. Like you said, people have been pushed from their homes. Their homes been destroyed by bulldozers. Residents from Amhara region have been on multiple occasions been prevented from entering Addis Ababa. And these are early signs, and people need to really come together and understand what's really happening in Addis Ababa. And people need to take action to prevent further cause of mass atrocities in that city. Before we end, Robel, I want to give you a few minutes to discuss another press release that was released on February 28, 2023. And this is when the Amhara Association of America declined to sign on the joint statement by civic organizations calling the UN Human Rights Council, the UN HRC members, not to terminate the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. So why did AAA decline to offer to sign the UN Human Rights Council call? Just briefly describe this concern that the AAA had on this matter.
Certainly, Biniam. This is also a very important press release that we issued on February 28th. And the ICHRE, or the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, was a commission that was established to investigate crimes and bring transitional accountability for the human rights violations that occurred, especially in the war in northern Ethiopia, but also in other parts of the country. So there was a mandate that focused on Tigray, Afar, and Amhara, but also went beyond that. And the AAA has met with the commission in the past and has discussed accountability and has provided information and worked with them to promote this. So AAA does support this call for accountability. There was a preliminary report that was issued that AAA met with the commission on and also expressed its concerns regarding. But now this latest call was actually initiated by other human rights organizations jointly to call for a renewal of the mandate, because the mandate of the commission was being vetoed by the Ethiopian government. And while AAA supports accountability, it actually called for specific wording in the statement, the joint statement, to include mention of investigations into Oromia region as well as into Addis Ababa. And this was rejected. And this is very concerning for AAA as an organization that advocates for Amhara people, but also for truth and justice, because there's been a trend of having biased pushes for biased justice, especially by organizations that have failed to report on the crimes against Amhara people. And so this statement was to inform the people, to inform the co-signees, but also to inform the community of what's happening, and to encourage them to course correct and to not to ignore and neglect the lives of other Ethiopians, but also of Amharas, because there's a trend of this happening at present. And so that was the significance of this press release. We hope that there will be improvements within some of these organizations, these human rights organizations, to start to report on the crimes against Amharas. We understand there's resource constraints, but time and time again, we've noticed a pattern of ignoring what's been happening. And we know, Biniam, people like you and I, we know because we've followed the updates, the reports, the news, that there isn't a day that goes by where Amhara people are not targeted in some corner of Ethiopia. There isn't a day when there isn't a violation, an arrest of a human rights defender, a massacre, a killing, arrests, and this situation is worsening. And so these organizations, if they hold all lives equal, to course correct and to actually report in a fair and unbiased manner.
Thank you so much, Robel. Lastly, I wanted to give you an opportunity kind of to speak into what can people do to really support the work that AAA is doing, involving the complaint that was submitted to the African Commission of Human Rights, the issue of Addis Ababa administration. And I also know that the Grand Amhara Convention is happening in Washington, D.C. Between March 25 to 26. And so just to talk about that an overall aspect, what can people do to support AAA, as well as just help the Amhara movements gain momentum?
Yes, that's a good question, Biniam. And in short, I would like to invoke AAA's mantra, which is Menkat Mederajet and Metagal, which roughly translates to empower, organize, and struggle. And I think the significance of that is the Amhara people in Ethiopia are facing an existential threat that's multifaceted, multidirectional. And so it's our responsibility now for the survival of the Amhara people to organize and to come up with solutions that can benefit all of us to resolve this problem. One Amhara organization isn't going to realistically solve everything, but this is a movement. This is a movement of people that, when united, can make amazing and extraordinary things happen. I think sometimes we miss when, some of these historic things happen. For example, recently we saw how the Abiy regime arrested Iskender Nega when he wasn't doing anything at all that was wrong. And it was the Amhara people in the Gojam area that had him freed. And this paralleled what happened in historically, for example, in Gondar, when the Amhara people under the regime of TPLF came out and defended Colonel Demek Azodu. And this is, history repeating itself. So now I think the Amhara people are more conscious, more aware, more awake of what's happening, and they're willing to act. And if they don't act, there's a looming threat that actually will affect all of them just because of their Amhara identity. So it's essential that everyone that takes their responsibility, makes it a duty to act and to do something that is going to benefit their people. And so in the diaspora, we have Amhara organizations that are working day and night to make a difference. You can join an Amhara organization. You can form an Amhara organization. You can work as an individual. You can fundraise to support internally displaced people. You can figure out ways to help the movement on the ground. You can come and organize platforms for people to come and discuss and to exchange ideas. You can work on projects. For example, this Grand Amhara Convention is something that I'm very excited about. I know that the team behind it spent a lot of time and energy organizing it, and that's also a venue where people can come free of charge. They don't have to pay admission to meet with their fellow Amhara community members and actually start to discuss solutions. And so this is happening in Washington, D.C. Later in March. I believe it's March 25th and 26th. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Biniam, but
Right.
this is Washington, D.C. There's a Telegram page, Grand Amhara Convention, that has all the details. And this is a way that people can come out in public and get involved. And outside of this, there's lots of things, activities happening. There's always protests. There's a need to educate people, to raise awareness of the genocide, so anybody can talk to journalists, their policymakers. AAA facilitates, for example, phone campaigns and virtual fly-ins, working with other Amhara organizations to educate policymakers. This is something that people can get involved in. You can also donate to AAA. AAA's work is actually funded with by its generous donors, and this is essential to its activities, including documenting the crimes against the Amharas, because if we don't do it, no one else will. So it's time that we take our problems into our own hands. We care for our own people, because if we don't care for our own people, nobody else will. And I'm confident, Biniam, that the future of Amhara is bright, and that there's going to come a day when we don't have to worry about the genocide, because we're going to stop it. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so now it's the time for everyone to raise awareness, to educate each other, and to come together. And this Grand Amhara Convention is a good opportunity. They can support AAA, they can support their local Amhara organizations, and that's how I would say anyone can make a difference.
Absolutely. And I can speak to that, Robel. You know, I live in the Bay Area. We are working very hard to establish an Amhara organization in the Bay Area. And these regional structures of Amhara organization is a way to be able to organize the communities within each city, within each state. And that eventually is what lead up to the Grand Amhara Convention that we're going to host in Washington, D.C. And, you know, the movement that we are having in the United States as well as in Europe is feeding what's happening on the ground level in Ethiopia. We are connecting with our heroic Fano protectorates. They give their life to protect innocent Amhara civilians, as well as other Ethiopians in Ethiopia. Their sacrifice will not go in vain. And what we do in Europe as well as in America, internationally, and that collaborating effort, what's happening on the ground level, will lead to a significant change. That is very. I'm also very optimistic with the Amhara movement, Robel. So on behalf of Magir Media, Robel, I want to thank you for your insights, as well as wonderful perspective on the human rights complaint that we just discussed. I am very certain that our viewers were able to understand the magnitude and the work ethic that led up to this complaint being submitted to the African Commission. It also highlights that all of us can continue to contribute and support and strengthen the work of the Amhara Association of America and other organizations that involve and advocate on behalf of Amharas, not just AAA. So this is a sign that AAA is standing as a beacon for freedom and human rights. And if you have any last remaining words, Robel, I want to give you this opportunity to conclude your statement.
Thank you, Biniam. I think you put it very nicely. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. Really, I think my takeaway message is that the Amhara people are facing a lot of threats. The reason why we're organized in the way that we are, the reason why the Amhara movement grew to the extent that it has grown, is because we're a people that don't have leadership on the ground. We don't have the people who claim to govern the Amhara people, who run the Amhara regional government. These are people who have failed, the people who have been complicit in the genocide, and their failures and their complicity is what has led us and forced us to organize ourselves. And so with that spirit, I think we have to sometimes just be patient with each other. We have to be cooperative. We have to be understanding, and we have to work towards solutions. And if we can work towards solutions and be constructive, I think that the future of Amhara's is bright, and I think we'll come to solutions very, very quickly. It won't take much time. So that's my final message.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robel, again, for joining us and giving us an overview. And thank you to our beloved Maghreb Media family members for watching. Please visit maghrebmedia.com to stay connected and stay tuned. Until we meet again, take care.
በአሜሪካና በካናዳ እንዲሁም በመላው ዓለም የምትገኙ ውድ የአማራ ልጆች በሙሉ በመላው ኢትዮጵያ የሚገኘው አማራ ወገናችን በማንነቱ የተለየ በተለያዩ ጊዜያትና ቦታዎች በጠላቶቹ አረመኔያዊ ጭፍጨፋና መፈናቀል እየተፈጸመበት እንደሆነ ይታወቃል። የአማራ ሕዝብ ትልቅ ከበባ ውስጥ ነው። ይህ ትውልድ ይሄንን ታሪክ ካልተሻገረ ታሪካዊ ስህተት ይፈጽማል ያሉትን የአማራ ተቆርቋሪ ቃል ማስታወስም ያሻል። ወገናችን ይህንን መንግሥት መር ጥቃት ለመመከት ከባድ ጥረት በማድረግ ላይ ይገኛል። ታዲያኛ ከሀገራችን ውጭ በተለያዩ ሀገራት ብንኖር አማራዎች ይህንን ጥረት ለማገዝና ለወገኖቻችን አለኝታ ለመሆን ምን እየሰራን ነው? ይህ ጥያቄ ለእያንዳንዱ አማራ የቀረበ የዘመናችን ታላቅ ጥሪ ነው። አደራ ለመቀበል የተዘጋጀን የአማራ ልጆች እንደ አውሮፓውያን አቆጣጠር መጋቢት 25 እና 26 ቀን 2015 ማርች 25 እና 26 2023 በዋሽንግተን ዲሲ የመጀመሪያውን ታላቅ የአማራ ጉባኤ እናካሂዳለን። በዚህ ጉባኤ የአማራ ድርጅቶች፣ ምሁራን፣ የአማራ ማህበራዊ አንቂዎች፣ ታዋቂ ግለሰቦች ይገኛሉ። ይህ ጉባኤ አንደኛ አማራው ስለ ራሱና ስለ ሀገሩ ያለውን አመለካከት ለመግለጽ የአማራነትን ታሪካዊ ዳራ ወደ ኋላ የምንመለከትበት፣ ሁለተኛ አሁን የአማራ ሕዝብ ያለበትን ሁኔታ የምንገመግምበት፣ ሶስተኛ የወደፊት የትግል አቅጣጫችንንና መዳረሻችንን የምንነድፍበት፣ አራተኛ ታላቁን የአማራ ሕዝብ በጠላትነት ፈርጀው አረመናዊ ድርጊት ለሚፈጽሙበት ነገዳውያንና ተከታዮቻቸው ደግሞ የአማራን ሕልውና ለማስጠበቅ ማንኛውንም ነገር እንደምናደርግ የምናሳውቅበት ታላቅ መድረክ ይሆናል። ይህ በደልና ጥቃት የሚያንገበግባችሁ የአብራኩ ክፋይ የሆናችሁ የአማራው ልጆች ሁሉ እንመካከር ኑ። የአማራን አንድነት ትብብርና ቤተሰባዊነት የማጠናከሪያው ጊዜ አሁንና አሁን ነውና። ፋና የአማራ ማህበራት ኅብረት በሰሜን አሜሪካ፣ ካሳ በካናዳ የአማራ ማህበረሰብ ኅብረትና የጉባኤው አዘጋጅ ኮሚቴ።
ፋኖ ፋኖ ኧረ ፋኖ ፋኖ ጥቅሱ ሲነጉ የፈሪ ልምደኛ ለፊት ተጋዳይ ፋኖ እንደ መጋኛ ኧረ ተው በሉ ያምባለ ሁሉ